Before we get started, you should know in this episode, we reveal the very gruesome details of Anita's murder. We don't take the sharing of these details lightly, and frankly, we talked at length about whether to include them at all. We decided to share because this podcast is not only about giving Anita a name, it's also about bringing justice to her name. Listener discretion is advised.
We just got the FOIA request back from Detroit Police, which is the Freedom of Information Act that allows us access to the original police report and the fire report.
A few weeks before Christmas, my research producer Kristen called to warn me that she'd finally gotten a hold to the original handwritten crime scene and firefighter report for Anita from 1987. This was a big deal because we'd been requesting these documents for 2 years. And every time we'd ask, the police would come back and tell us they didn't have anything.
They told me not to even bother putting in a FOIA because they said they wouldn't have it.
That didn't exactly sound right because Sergeant Shannon Jones, the lead detective in Anita's murder investigation, shared with us how she died. So we know there's some sort of paper trail. Kristen tried one more time, and finally, without fanfare or warning, an 8-page police and fire report arrived in her email box.
And when I read it, to be honest with you, my first feeling was, I'm going to have to tell Tanya and Antonio this. That this was so much more detailed than I was expecting. It was so personal. And I mean, to be really honest, I had to wait a day to let it sink in to call you guys because it just felt like such another disappointment on such a long line of awful things that happened to Anita.
But I'm going to tell you, there was nothing, not even Kristen's warning, that could have prepared me for its contents. On Wednesday, November 11th, 1987, 2 neighbors who lived near a vacant house on Wanda Street were awakened by barking dogs. A neighbor who lived next door called 911 after seeing orange flames shooting from the vacant house. A clear case of arson, firefighters wrote in the fire report. The smell and burn marks indicated gasoline had been intentionally poured along the first floor. These are the details Sergeant Jones initially shared with us, but the next set of details I'm about to share are new. Once the fire was out, firefighters went inside to assess, and while walking through the rubble, one of them noticed human remains. A crushed skull, likely caused by the top floor collapsing during the fire. Then the torso. The charred remains of a body they'd identify 30 years later as Anita's.
It says that she lay face down in this house. They had her age wrong, somewhere between 15 and 20 years old.
When I first read this report, it literally took my breath away. There was no soot in her lungs, which indicated to detectives that she'd been strangled to death before she was brought to the house. Her arms and legs were either burned so badly that they disintegrated, or she was dismembered. Authorities can't say for sure. And there's one more thing. Anita was pregnant.
This is above and beyond a crime of passion, right? This isn't a I love you and I can't live without you crime. This isn't a jealous rage crime. This isn't the report of a person that was temporarily insane in the moment, in the heat of the moment. And this is calculated. This is savage murder.
Antonio is actually known for years, since the DNA match in 2020, that his mother was strangled to death, that her body was found in that abandoned house on Wanda Street that was set on fire. He even knew from Sergeant Jones that Anita was pregnant, somewhere around 7 or 8 months. But this added detail of how she was found, what the scene looked like, the condition of her body, and how she was burned beyond recognition. When I first read it, I immediately thought that Antonio should never know these things. It's just so gruesome, beyond anything a son should have to carry. But I also know Antonio, and he said to me so many times that the worst thing that could have happened to him has already happened.
It's something I've thought about all my adult life, to be honest with you, you know. And it's just as heinous as I imagine. And I think that's the shocker more than anything, because you think about these things and, you know, there's nothing good about it, you know. I mean, it's really a nightmare that, you know, you just can't wake up from, no matter how hard you try. But then to read it and know that that nightmare was real. I just think about my birthday was the 9th. And I know for a fact she wouldn't miss that. And it just takes me back to that moment. Just waiting for her.
That birthday. Anita's body was found in 87 on November 11th. Antonio's birthday is November 9th. That was his 15th birthday. Anita, by that time, had been missing for months. As Antonio remembers it, the people around him on that day tried to cheer him up, to tell him that his mom probably would be coming home soon. But it was at that moment, that very moment, when he knew that wasn't true.
I mean, people dismiss that. Oh, well, you know, maybe she just went on vacation and all this shit. But I remember that birthday. I remember my birthday.
Everybody was talking about it, you know, because we couldn't find her. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I was talking to my brother. I was talking to Tony. You know what I'm saying? We even went down there and be afraid. That's when I filed the police report. You know, back then, they weren't taking no DNA.
When Anita's sister Val and others filed a missing persons report, they wrote her age as 29 years old. But the crime scene report estimated her age to be between 15 and 20. So back in 1987, police didn't put together the missing persons reports with the discovery of the remains because she was so small, 5'1", and they incorrectly estimated that Anita was a teenager. When our producer Kristen realized the discrepancy, she called the Detroit Public Library, which keeps newspaper archives, and searched for a news brief one more time. Remember, I initially searched and couldn't find anything. And now I know why.
Well, what we found is they did report on it. Mm-hmm. It is in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. But their estimation of her age, because she was so small, was that they thought it was someone much younger. Mm-hmm. So if you guys had seen this report, you would have not put it together.
It was in one of those news brief sections that, you know, gets buried down at the bottom of a page. And it was one of like 4 or 5. And looking at it and seeing them describe Anita as a adolescent, it was like, well, how could anybody have ever made that connection? It made sense that no one had made the connection. Not police, not the coroner's office, not family and friends who honestly probably read that article, right? Because that was the one way to see what was going on. There was no connection to be made.
Well, I'm glad she raised me to be civilized, because I can think of a million things to do to, in response, but any case, I'm gonna pray for my mom. I'm gonna pray for justice, for her and people like her.
We are going to seek justice, and we're going to get it.
Yeah.
Because we're seeking healing. We're seeking clarity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we, in God's eyes, we already got it.
Who did this to Anita? And why? I'm Tanya Mosley, and from TMI Productions and APM Studios, this is She Has a Name, Episode 6, Theories.
What movie is this?
This is Nobody. He's nobody, but he's an assassin.
That's what I thought. Look, the way he's
I
coming
watch
out
movies.
here. Yeah, it's like, of course you're watching a true crime or a murder mystery.
Yeah.
When I went to visit Anita's sister Valerie in the fall of 2023, she was watching her favorite type of movie, stories about missing persons and psychopaths and murderers.
Hey, what can I say? Everything I watch got something to do with murder.
Yeah.
Something to do with murder, baby.
Columbo, Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, Law and Order.
Signs of a psychopath, buried in the backyard, all kinds of forensics, you know what I'm saying? Serial killers, I watch that shit every day.
Why?
To get into their minds. I think to really get into their minds, you know what I'm saying?
After Anita's remains were matched through DNA with Antonio, detectives notified the family that the manner of death was strangulation. And when Val heard that, she immediately thought back to a detail she'd heard about murderers who kill that way.
I learned that when you choke somebody out, when you strangle somebody, that's the worst form of killing that it is than getting shot and stabbed. Because you're looking at this person looking at you, and you choking the life out of them. You see the lights go out. You see what I'm saying? That's more than pain. That's terror.
Strangulation is the most common and lethal forms of domestic violence. It's intimate, which is why everyone we talked to who was around and in touch with Anita before her murder, Valerie, Frank, and Antonio, all of them believe that Anita was killed by someone she knew. Sergeant Jones says that's entirely possible. But because this crime happened 35 years ago, there is basically no evidence to go on.
We don't have any DNA evidence, right, that would help connect anything. We don't have any video or cell phone records from who she was talking to back then or possibly hanging out with.
But of course, that hasn't stopped family and friends from entertaining theories. And there are 4 main ones. The first theory is that Anita left on her own to start a new life. Remember, Antonio said she was calling him for a while after she disappeared. Things had been really rough for her. Linda and Val, seeing Anita beaten and bruised many times, believed the man she was seeing was abusing her. Her money was tight, and her recreational drug use was slowly turning into more of a habit. Maybe she just wanted to get away from it all. Well, her friend Rhonda, the only friend of Anita's we were able to track down, says it's hard to believe this theory that Anita would just up and leave her life because one thing Anita wasn't was a quitter. She stood up to everyone and everything.
She's a bad girl. She's like carry 45s in her purse all the time. So she kept a pistol on her all the time. A lot of men respected her, and she worked at a bar, so that's how she got a little side hustle with selling weed at the bar and then working at the bar, and everybody respected her.
Rhonda and Anita met in the 70s when they were teenagers through the guys they were dating, and the two became fast friends in the way girls often do when they're young. For years, they'd link up from time to time to go to boxing matches, which was Anita's favorite thing to do. One memory for Rhonda sticks out in particular. It was a few years before Anita's disappearance. Rhonda still gets emotional thinking about it. It's okay. Take your time.
One time she came and stayed with us, but she got down on her luck looking for another place. So she came and stayed with us. She played this record every morning. She used to wake up and play Lovely Day.
Lovely Day by Bill Withers.
And so that's how she looked at life. She looked at life as like, it's going to be a lovely day every day.
Where do you think that came from in her?
She just wanted to enjoy life. And she probably came from like me where we didn't really finish school, but we wanted to, make our kids happy. We had motherly instinct in us, and so that's how she just wanted to make things happy and be happy.
Everyone told me that Anita took that role of motherhood very seriously. Even when she was down on her luck, living away from Antonio as she got herself together. Actually, her motivation for getting herself together was Antonio. And also her new baby that was on the way.
What does it say?
So this is a Dr. Hicks appointment.
One day while Antonio was visiting me, he brought with him a file filled with documents he collected over the years. Papers with meeting dates he had with police, newspaper clippings and photographs, and Anita's last journal. Both Val and Antonio say that she kept many journals and wrote in them all the time. On the cover of this one, in cursive, she wrote, "My hopes, my dreams, my love." And inside were plans for her new baby.
And see, it didn't make sense to me now, but I told you, Shannon Jones, the Sergeant Jones, said that she was pregnant, like when she was murdered. So this is a doctor's appointment, 9th floor, Dr. Hicks, appointment 1:30, March 30th. So apparently she was writing some things that was, I guess, of real time to her at that moment in time.
Anita was planning for a future, but she wasn't running away. The second theory is that a serial killer murdered Anita. There was a string of savage murders at the hands of serial killers in Detroit, specifically in the 80s and 90s.
I've looked at the different people that were out there during that time, and I know a lot of those past people that have confessed to different things. You look for patterns as well, right? I think on some of those cases back then, I think there was a lot of confessions about what they did and who they did it to, and I don't think any of them ever described anything kind of matching to Anita's case.
When I look back at some of those old cases that made headlines back then, there were actually instances where the killers murdered women in the same manner as Anita. But Sergeant Jones says there are patterns and details about those crimes that are never shared with the public, and those are what set Anita apart from the others. My old friend, former Detroit detective Ira Todd, was actually on some of those serial killer murder cases.
My last case was a 71-year-old guy. It was similar to your sister case. This guy was snatching girls up at bus stops and people at bus stops and things like that.
Most of the cases in Detroit involving serial killers were sexually motivated, and almost all of the victims were sex workers, which Anita was not.
I'm not saying that, prostitutes deserve that, but she wasn't no streetwalker, nothing like that. You know what I'm saying? We never think that she would become a missing because she wasn't a streetwalker. She picking up anybody. She's a tough girl, but she wasn't that kind of woman.
The third theory is that Anita got caught up in something or knew information that put her life in danger. She was at one time involved with the drug game and knew lots of people from the underbelly of Detroit. And in 1987, remember, the city saw one of its highest murder rates. Nearly 700 of them, and many of them were connected to drug activity. Basically, it's possible, but they don't have any evidence of it.
The police department, we can't go on feelings or thoughts. We have to go off of evidence.
Now, the fourth theory is the one that Antonio, Val, and Frank have been holding on for the last 3 decades.
In cases of law and things like that, it says that most victims know their killer, right? Most acts of violence aren't necessarily random.
But you know what? I'm going to tell you, out damn near 30 years, it's that little 2% hope that maybe she left and started a new life and ran away from him. Just 2%. Because I knew already that nigga killed her.
The family's main suspect is a man they couldn't understand why Anita loved. He's the man they believe beat her so bad she had a boot mark on her chest. The man she fled to her sister Val's house in Cleveland to get away from. A man known for violence, arson, and even murder.
It's the Leroy Lyons guy, I think that's the guy she was involved with at that time, so.
In the firefighter and police reports from 1987, the night they found Anita's remains in that abandoned house, a next-door neighbor told investigators that they saw 2 men they had never seen before walking in and out of the house a week earlier. At the time, the neighbor thought the men were probably taking salvage materials since the house was vacant. Another neighbor who lived directly across the street from the crime scene told investigators that she could see directly into the window of that vacant house. There stood a male figure. The neighbor could only see the outline, standing in the living room. She then saw, according to the report, the male figure strike a match and then throw it down. Soon after, the house erupted in flames. Now that's something, if you saw it, you'd never forget, right? So I went to search for that neighbor, actually both of them. They both died around 2012.
The challenges are there's no witness that has come forward. So on her case, it's pretty much going to lead down to if the suspect came forward and what they told us matches up with what we found.
Well, Anita's family has come to their own conclusions. He's also on the radar of police, too. Not officially a suspect, but authorities say definitely a person of interest. The man Anita was involved with, Leroy Lyons.
She knew Leroy while she was young and everything like that. They was dealing drugs or whatever. I was been scared of that man. I wouldn't go near him, And he looked crazy.
Leroy and his brothers lived in the same West Side neighborhood of Anita and her family in Detroit growing up. Val remembers around the time period when they all met.
After my mother died, because the girl next door, Sandy, was my sister niece's best friend. I got a picture of her too. And she was going with Leroy's brother, Noble. It was 3 of them, you know.
Sometime in the late 70s, Leroy went to prison for several years for robbing a bank. And when he got out, sometime around 1983, he connected with Anita.
It's like when Leroy got out of jail, they were doing fine, you know what I'm saying? My brother was selling weed downstairs, you know, we used to go visit him, and, you know, the dope was upstairs, it was a whole house, was, you know, upstairs, downstairs. I mean, it had it going on, had everything, you know.
Val, as you remember, told us Anita set Leroy up after he got out of prison, supplied him with drugs to sell so that he could get on his feet. And somewhere along the way, Val and Antonio believe that their relationship turned romantic. And nobody could make sense of it because Anita was with James, the guy Antonio looked up to and called his stepdad.
I knew that, you know, she kind of given him a level of trust to that degree. You know, the kid may have even had a key.
Antonio's memories are fragmented, but the kid he's talking about is Leroy. And he remembers that after James moved out, Leroy began spending more and more time at the apartment that he shared with his mother. And sometimes, Antonio remembers they'd even go hang out at Leroy's house on Mack Avenue, the house Val told us about where she and Uncle Frank once found Anita, the one with the bars on the windows and a double-bolted lock that you needed a key from the inside in order to get out.
They had bars on the windows, bars on the doors like that. It was all barred in on Shane Street. You know, if you're familiar with Detroit, on Mack and Shane.
1993, 6 years after Anita's disappearance, Antonio would be reminded of Leroy's house on Mack when it became national news.
This talks about him and the wife, 1993. Leroy Lyons and his wife, Sharice Williams, were tried for manslaughter after 7 children died in a house fire.
On February 18th, 1993, Leroy Lyons told police he and the mother of his children, Sharice Williams, left 7 children, ages 7 months to 9 years old, home alone on Mack Avenue. After the 2 left, a fire erupted. Neighbors reported they could hear the children screaming inside. But the house was so fortified by the metal bars that authorities said in one report that it would have been impossible for even an adult to get out. All 7 children died in the fire. Their bodies were found huddled in a bedroom together. 9-year-old LaWanda, 7-year-old Nakia, 6-year-old Daquan, 4-year-old LaQuinton, 3-year-old Venus, 2-year-old Mark, and 7-month-old Anthony. Notorious for its reputation as a city on fire, this tragedy still remains one of the deadliest in Detroit history. My producers and I drove over to the address where the Mack house once stood. And just like on Wanda Street, all of the houses were gone. The entire block is now just one overgrown field.
I'm surprised at myself that I'm this emotional. Look at it. It's just nothing here. There were lives here. People built lives and hopes and dreams, and now you wouldn't even, when you drive past this area, you wouldn't even know. Like, you wouldn't even look to your left or your right. You're just looking straight ahead.
Yeah, it's like if you look really closely, you can see the clues left behind, but of people who lived here.
You know, like, that's a foundation. You can tell there was something there, but just not what it was.
Leroy and Sharice were charged with 7 counts of manslaughter for the deaths of the 7 children. And during the trial, Leroy said that he and Sharice needed money and left the children home alone so that they could search for scrap metal to sell for cash. During their trial, Leroy testified that shortly before leaving, he lit newspaper torches in a crawl space to thaw what he thought were frozen pipes. But there were no frozen pipes. Although it was the dead of winter, the water had been shut off for unpaid bills. There was also no heat. After a short trial, in October of 1993, Leroy Lyons and Charisse Williams were acquitted of manslaughter charges. One of the jurors said, the couple had done something wrong by leaving their children home alone, but they had already suffered enough. Now, 6 years after the Mac fire, in 1999, Leroy Lyons made news again. This time, the headline in the Detroit Free Press newspaper read, "This time, he's found guilty."
Leroy Lyons and his brother Preston Lyons were convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and death of Christopher Clark and Anthony Bates Lyons and Preston's niece.
In May of 1999, Leroy and his brother Preston Lyons were found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of their niece and her boyfriend.
Leroy thought his niece and her husband stole some dope or some money or something. He killed both of them. You know what I'm saying? He killed his own niece.
According to court documents, in November of 1987, the same year and month Anita's body was found, Leroy suspected his niece Antoinette and her boyfriend Christopher of stealing money from him. Leroy shot Christopher, then stuffed his body into a trunk of a car before setting it on fire. His niece Antoinette's body has never been found. Val says, with all that she knows about Leroy, all of the crimes he committed, she has no doubt in her mind that Leroy killed Anita as well. Leroy is serving 2 life sentences for the premeditated murders of his niece and her boyfriend. He maintains his innocence. Now, an interesting note, this case involving Leroy's niece was cracked after 2 detectives were asked to take a second look at the file. Antonio now wants detectives to do the same thing for Anita.
If I was a detective, I'd be all over the shit because, and you probably can still slide this to a profiler of today. Somebody fresh out of college, they can take one look at this and say, yeah, we're dealing with a psychopath here.
Now, I want to make clear that even though the family has strong beliefs that Leroy Lyons killed Anita, or at least knows something about her murder, at this point, Leroy is only a person of interest in this case, not an official suspect. That means police are interested in talking with him because they believe he may have some information. One of the bigger challenges for law enforcement, though, is that because Leroy is serving 2 life sentences with no chance of parole, he has very little incentive to give any information to police, big or small. We put in a request directly to speak with Leroy and his brother Preston, who is also serving a life sentence. We'll let you know if and when we hear back.
It's like a phoenix rising, right? They thought 1987 was the end.
One evening, Antonio and I gathered over a bottle of wine and just talked about what we've learned so far. The gritty details from the fire and crime scene report, the revelations about Leroy Lyons' crimes and his status as a person of interest to police, and where Antonio wants to go next in this investigation.
I'm happy with the progress we're making. We're answering our calling, aren't we?
Yes.
So many levels.
And You're doing it all. Like, sometimes I piece together just in my, well, all the time, because I'm thinking about this story all the time, but I'm piecing together all the parts of you over time. And I think, like, every single thing is because you did it. Everything. We're this far. You are this far in finding out what happened to your mom. And now the last leg is justice.
We have justice. We already have it. I just want to make an example of the motherfuckers. That's what I really want to do. I want to use them as a case study. So shit like this can have a benchmark for others that are going through things like this. Mm. You know, so often these things are just swept away. But I think that's why it's come back around for us, you know. I mean, it's, yeah. And that's my mom talking right there. It is. Some shit she'll say. But yeah, we'll teach them. We'll teach them. We'll teach them. But they can't touch us.
No.
You know, they killed their body, but they can never kill a spirit.
That's right.
You know, they're nothing.
That's right.
Suckers.
Next time on She Has a Name, Antonio's entire life has been focused on finding his mother. Now that he has some answers, what happens next?
So one of the issues is, you know, we have this illusion of closure, that we get information and now we're finished. And that's about as untrue as anything.
How does he go forward when so much of his life has been spent in the past? And what does healing really look like if Anita's case is never solved? What kind of justice is there still left to get for Anita? I love getting letters from you. Thank you so much for everyone who's written in to tell me your theories, your thoughts, your personal stories. We also want to hear from folks who might have information. If you have any information in this case, big or small, email me at Tonya@deartbt.com. That's TONYA@deartbt.com. New episodes of this 10-part She Has a Name series drops every Thursday. She Has a Name is a TMI and APM Studios production. Our team includes executive producer Antonio Wiley, showrunner Nicole Hill, audio producer and sound designer Marie Mendoza, and research producer Kristen Fraser. Our music was composed by Andy Clausen, sound design and final mastering by Enrico Benjamin. APM's executive producer is Erica Kraus. Senior production manager is Nick Ryan, and APM executives in charge are Joanne Griffith and Chandra Kavadi. I'm your host, creator, and executive producer, Tanya Mosley. A special thanks to Cully Summers from the Detroit Public Library for searching and finding old newspaper articles for us. Thank you so much. And Monique Smith with the City of Detroit Law Department, who helped us find the crime and fire documents through the Freedom of Information Act. Also, a big thank you to Ira Todd, my admin Rochelle Roberts, Melissa Kuipers at NPR West, and thank you to everyone who has been willing to talk with us. This is for us.